Hello to our valuable patrons. We so appreciate you guys. Today we're going to do a video on a topic that is near and dear to my heart and every horse owner. We're going to talk about feet. Things you need to look for in a good trim, things you need to look for in a good shoeing job. Little cameo by the donkeys there. No, I'm not going to do it. Things you need to look for in a good trim, things you should look for from a shoe, and things that we can influence with our shoeing and trimming. All right, today let's talk about my favorite topic, feet. The old adage, no hoof, no horse, is so true. I can't even begin to tell you. So today we're going to talk about the basics of feet and go over some really easy landmarks we can use. Gigi here has just had her feet done, so we're going to show you this, and then we're going to compare it to Gigi when her feet are at about 6 weeks. I like to keep them on a 5-week schedule, but I'll admit to not being the greatest owner about getting that schedule done with a farrier. So the 6 weeks thing was my fault, not the farrier's fault, just to be clear. So anyway, let's go over a couple things on feet. One thing you want to look at on Gigi, she has a nice clean hoof wall. She just had her feet done, and yet you notice that it hasn't really been sanded, nothing like that has been done to it. There's still a little dirt on here, and that's fine, especially for a barefoot horse. She doesn't need a lot of fancy stuff done to her feet. She just needs a good quality trim, and that's where we are. So the next thing we're going to look at is a couple of landmarks. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at is where the foot actually hits the ground. So you want to get down low, as long as you can trust your horse to get down low. So I'm getting down really low. So we'll see that her heel, the ground surface where it starts to bear weight, is about here. I'm going to use the ruler to mark that. The toe, the ground surface of the toe, and I'm not talking about here where the toe comes out to. I'm talking about actually where it hits the ground. That's about here. Don't worry, I have more things to mark that with. So that's about there. So let me make it a straight line. There we go. Okay, so her foot is bearing weight in this space here. So we're going to look at a couple things from that. One, and this is easier to see on an x-ray, we talk about that. Talk about that a little bit later too, but the coffin joint is right about here. If we shot an x-ray, we would draw a circle around that joint and then bring it straight down. We want the widest part of the foot and the center of the foot to be right below that. And this is all for biomechanics of the foot to function properly. So Gigi is pretty close to that. She's maybe a little far forward for that on her. Let's see. Her coffin joint's right about there. Actually, she's a little far back. So you can see there's a little more of her foot in front of my finger than behind. Not horrible, but it is what it is. This means if we really needed to impact her breakover, we would have to do it with a shoe, because what Mother Nature gave her isn't quite what we need. So that's the first landmark we're looking at. Next thing we're going to look at is we're going to drop a line down the center of her fetlock joint, and we want her heels to come close to touching that line. You can see she's not quite there on that either, and that's conformationally her. So on her, we're really going to want to make sure that we're constantly taking this foot, and every time we trim it, we're going to think about backing it up. And when I say that, what I mean is that we're going to make sure that we take the toe back a little bit. We want to, you can see that the farrier 45'd the front of this foot, so that the breakover is as far back as we can get it on a trimmed foot. If we had a shoe on her, it means that we would manipulate her with mechanics in the shoe to fix what Mother Nature didn't give her. The next thing we're going to look at on her is ideally we want the front of the foot to match her pastern. Again, she's a little bit of what we call a broken back, where this here, her pastern, is back farther than that line, but that is her conformation, not necessarily the farrier, and I'll show you how I know that in a second. But our goal is that this is all one line. If we really want to know, we need to shoot an x-ray. This is why you should have a great relationship with your veterinarian, and your veterinarian should have a great relationship with your farrier. Okay, now let's pick up the bottom of her foot and see what we can learn from the bottom. All right, so the first place I always start on these guys is just getting a good look at what we've got. I want to know where the widest part of the heel is, and where it should be is at the widest, highest part of the frog. So on Gigi here, that is right here. And we're going to use a little Sharpie to help us see this. So that's right here. Where it actually is on Gigi right now is right here. And what that is where the wall comes around and turns into the bars. That's what we've got going on there. So this is the back of her heel where she's weight bearing. And you know that's what it is because you can see how she's sort of scuffed here. That's the back part of that. So in a perfect world, this should be back here. And the way you do that is you literally just file the hoof down until you're back to here. We can't do that on her. And this is true of most horses as well, because if we took the foot down anymore, we'd be into sensitive tissue. This is something we would fix with a shoe if we had a shoe on her. Gigi's obviously barefoot, and it's within acceptable tolerances for her. So she handles this just fine. But if I had a lameness, this would be something I would really be paying attention to. The next thing I'm going to do is draw a line down the center of her foot, and the center of the foot is always based on the frog. Okay, so I'm not necessarily going to look at the foot and say where's 50%. I'm going to draw a line down the center sulcus of the frog and all the way down through the middle. There we go. So there's the center of her foot. Ideally, we have 50% on this side, 50% on this side. You can see on Gigi we have a little bit more on the outside, and that's typical. Horses land heavier on the inside of their front feet in particular, and so when they land hard here, they push the foot that way. So every time you trim, and this is pretty much true of everything, you want to address the flare that they try to get on the outside. So we're just going to pay attention to that, and you can see that her farrier has addressed that right here. The next thing I'm going to mark is the widest part of her foot. And we look at the white line, which is actually this right here, not the wall. It's the same place on Gigi because she doesn't have much flare, but if you've got a horse that has a lot of flare to their wall, that may be a different location. So we're going to come to the white line right here. We're going to eyeball the widest part, which we'll say is right about here. Okay, so this is important because the center of rotation is right about here. So if I put the foot down, this will be in the center of that coffin joint with that line right down. And so what we want is that 50% of the foot is behind this and 50% is in front. And again, we're pretty close here. Yeah, we're not too far off. And that is why, I'll be honest, Gigi can go barefoot. She doesn't need a lot of help from a shoe because Mother Nature gave her a pretty solid foot to work with. The next thing, and this is just getting into a little bit of hoof mapping, which I'll put a link down below in the comments on a video for hoof mapping, but this is just a really cool technique to show us some other things. I'm going to go from this dot that I put here. I'm going to draw a line reasonably perpendicular to my center line up to the top here. This is not always easy to do this way. I usually do it with a foot between my legs. So bear with me here. You guys can get the idea though. All right, so where this hits the white line, and that is not out at the front, that's actually right here. This is the white line right here. You can't necessarily see it really well on her, but this is her white line. So where that hits, we're going to draw another line. Oh, sorry. And this line represents the front of her coffin bone. So we want her breakover, from an anatomic standpoint, we want her breakover to be about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch in front of that. And that's what we have right here. So this is a really nice trimming job. She's got her foot exactly where it needs to be. Let's look at some other things that the foot can tell us. So I'm going to drop a straight line down from the very front of the coronary band. So that's about there, right? Her breakover should be about 1 finger length in front of that. So her breakover should be right about here. Her breakover currently, so it should be here, is currently the front of her foot, right? So we have probably a good 3/4 of an inch difference. The next thing we're going to look at is where her heels are in relation to her fetlock joint. And this stays pretty good on a regularly trimmed horse. But if I draw a line, I'm going to draw a bit of a circle through the fetlock joint, and then I'm going to drop a line straight down such that it comes down the middle of that circle. Her heels should touch that line. They're close on her. It's a little bit out front, but not too bad. And considering where she's at, these guys are at the end of their shoeing cycle in this part of the video. So it's just a little bit far forward from where it should be. When I pick up the bottom of the foot, you're going to see some other things. But the next thing we're going to look at is where the center of her hoof is. And when we're looking at the center of the hoof, we're not necessarily looking at what you kind of can see for hoof. What we're looking at is where the front touches and where the back touches. That was just a little cameo by Ophabia the cat. So her heel touches right about here, right about there, and her toe touches right about here. So the center of her foot currently, we're going to put right here, the front of the ruler here, right? Where we want the center of that foot, this is a little bit tricky, and radiographs are the best way to tell this. This is why you should have a great relationship with your veterinarian, who should have a great relationship with your farrier, so that you can get foot radiographs. So you're going to have to trust me on this a little bit. But the center, there's a joint right here. This is where the coffin joint is centered. We're going to draw a circle around that joint, kind of like we did the fetlock joint. You can really see this radiographically. We're going to draw that center, and coming down from the center is where the center of her foot should be. So you can see again, she's a little bit far forward on her center from where she should be. Shockingly, it's related almost exactly to how far forward her breakover is from where it should be. Okay, so on here, what we're going to look at, and again, remember these horses are at the end of their trimming cycle, so this is okay, but I'm going to put a line across the very back of her heels, and where that is the last place where her heels bear weight. So you can see that that is roughened up on her, and that's how I know where that is. So that on her is right there. It should be at the widest part of her frog, which would be back here. So when you look at the trimmed foot, you'll see that this is farther back. So we always start everything from there, okay? So if I'm going to say that here is the widest part of her frog, now I want the widest part of her foot, which is always fun to eyeball, but I'm going to say it's right about there. Should be the 50% mark on her foot. And she's not far off of that. And that's because, again, she gets regularly trimmed. Her foot, she's got pretty good natural foot conformation, but everything is just a little too far forward now. So when we do a trim on her, it should all come back to exactly where we want it. A couple things on her as well, and this is just typical of a horse who's due. She's got a lot of cup to her sole. She does go barefoot, so she's got a really good toe callus, and this is really good quality hoof wall. So there's just some few things about Gigi's foot that we like. So that's the bottom of the foot, and how the structures here are pretty good. They're just a little too far forward. Okay, I want to be clear, I'm not throwing my farrier under the bus. This is at the end of a shoeing cycle, so we can demonstrate some things. But this is a horse that if I walked up to him and the owner told me that they got their feet done last week and they got shoes put on last week, I would be like, oh, you have to be kidding me. Versus right now, they're at 6 weeks. They're actually a week overdue because the owner forgot to tell the farrier about the appointment. So anyway, on this foot, what we can see, much like Gigi's, is here's the heel of the shoe. Definitely too far forward. I mean, if I drop that line down the center, you can see, Paul is a little more upright, but you can see the heel is where it needs to be of the foot, but the heel of at the bottom is way too far forward. That should actually be back here. We're going to pick the foot up in a second and look at it. And again, if I drop that line down here, you can see his breakover should probably be at about the front of the clip. It's not there now. It's way out here. And again, he's just overdue on his cycle. The big thing that I want to look at on this is when we take the camera up and we're looking down the foot right here. So if you look right here, you can't see the shoe. Like, see how we can see the shoe right here? Can't see the shoe right here. It is actually underneath and the hoof wall is coming down over it. You don't want to see that. Imagine being a human and walking with your shoe underneath your heel and your foot is spilling out over the shoe. Like, it can't be comfortable, right? So now let's look at the bottom of the foot and see how the bottom looks. Okay, so when we look at the bottom of the foot, you can see that Paul is shedding some frog. That's just a normal thing. Don't worry too much about that. He does have a little bit of thrush in this foot, which he's subject to. See this really deep crevice here? You can see it goes pretty far down. His owner needs to be better about putting some tomorrow mastitis ointment in there. It's tomorrow mastitis ointment. You can get it on Amazon. Works amazing. But you can see from here, see the hoof wall coming over the shoe? That means we're doing the opposite of what we want to do with the shoe, which is to support the foot. We're not supporting it. We're almost anti-supporting it. The other thing is you can tell he has really grown forward on this because, again, there's the back of the shoe, so that's the back of his heel, and it should be here. So on the pictures where he's had his feet just done, you can see that this heel is way back where it needs to be. Now, if we go from here to here and we say this is the widest part, again, he is pretty much staying with the 50-50, and that's a really big deal. What we can do, though, on some of these horses, let's say that Paul's foot wanted to do this and we had a really hard time ever getting the heels back far enough. For instance, thoroughbreds are really bad at this. Like Ernie has an underrun heel. And so when he was showing, it was a constant battle for us to really support that underrun heel on that foot. It's a conformational thing. It was something we had to deal with. It wasn't something we could fix. So in that case, we used the shoe to fix what Mother Nature didn't give him. So we would take this shoe and make sure that it is always set back to where we want the heel to be, as opposed to where Mother Nature put the heel. So again, we would make sure that the branches of our shoe came back to the widest part of the frog. It's a big deal. Everything starts with a trim that goes back to the widest part of the frog. And if you can't do it, you create it with a shoe. Some of the other things we can do with a shoe, and Paul doesn't really have much of this on his foot, but we can take, this is the breakover point on this shoe. So it's that rock of the shoe, and it's the moment when the foot goes from flat to broken over, basically. That moment is really important because it's the moment at which tension comes off the deep digital flexor tendon. So it's a really big deal. You don't want that to happen too late in the process of a stride. So we could take this shoe and we could put more of an angle into the front of it. You know, for instance, let's say we just ground this down and put an angle on it, and that would automatically bring the breakover back without having changed anything else. So those are some of the mechanics things that we can play on with shoes. Okay, so let's look at a freshly shod foot, and you can see what we can really do with a shoe. So here we've got the breakover set back. If I do my straight line coming down, you can see that he would be here, maybe even here, where the breakover would be. With the shoe, we've got the breakover all the way back to here. We've also got really good support on the back here, back of the heels. And Paul here is a jumper, jumps pretty decent heights. He could go higher if his rider would be better, but anyway. So we need to make sure that when he lands, the foot is supported. And by the foot, we really mean this back half of the foot. So by being able to hang the shoe back here, we're giving him really good support of those heels when he comes down and the heels expand. All this weight coming down the leg is going to make those heels expand. They need somewhere to go. So if we come up and look down at the branch of the shoe, what you can see, here's the wall, right? And then we've got shoe all the way out to here that he has to expand that foot onto. This is then beveled, that's what this edge is here, so that if he brings a hind foot up and catches it, there's less of a chance of him grabbing it. Now, you'll see farriers talk about that if they're pulling shoes, they're going to fit the heels really tight. For the most part, front shoes coming off is not a hind foot problem grabbing the back. It's that the breakover is too far forward and your horse is walking like it's got clown shoes on and it can't get the front foot out of the way before the back foot comes up to grab the foot. So by making sure that the foot is brought far enough back and this breakover is back, we can prevent that problem. Okay, so now you'll see what you can really do with a shoe from the bottom. For instance, Paul's heels are up here. The widest part of his frog is here. We've actually been able to bring the shoe back past that widest part of his frog and give him really, really, really good support. So we're fixing what Mother Nature didn't quite have right. And that's what we're looking for a shoe to do. We want to leave a horse barefoot as long as we can until we have to fix something Mother Nature didn't give him, or we're asking him to do things Mother Nature didn't intend, like walk around on concrete at a horse show all day. So this is actually giving us better support than Mother Nature. And if you look here, see if you can see this, you may have to come from the side just a little bit. This is where the breakover is on this shoe, right here. Now see the bevel right here? The breakover is this point here. So you can see here is the front of Paul's foot and here's his breakover. So just by mechanics built into the shoe and where we've set it, we've managed to aid that breakover a bit and fully support his heels. All right, so that was a massive information dump on everything that I look at when I'm looking at a foot. If you've got questions, drop them below and we'll get them answered as fast as we can. All right, Paul has a little bit of thrush, and we commonly think of it as goo on either side of the frog, but the way that I see it create issues is this big crater down the center of the frog. This is where we actually really get issues. Easiest way to treat it, tomorrow mastitis ointment. Conveniently comes with this little tip that works great to go right down in that. I push the plunger just a smidge, and the tomorrow treats it all. If I can get into little spots on here, I'll do the same thing. You can see I'm just barely pushing the plunger. And there we go. Do that intermittently for a couple of weeks, that'll clear up.